Do you ever wonder if Easter was real or was fake or something is just people made up? I usually wonder, is it true or not? So in this video, you will know eventually where Eastern bunny came from, where this all bunny stuff, the chocolate, all the kid stuff came from. In this video, you will have a good idea and you will know for sure. So no more doubt. Without further ado, let's jump to the video.
Every spring, a familiar claim starts circulating online. The Easter Bunny is an ancient symbol with deep roots in pagan mythology and religious practice. And I'm not just talking about random people on social media. You can find this claim in otherwise reputable sources. Here's a guy with a PhD writing for the Smithsonian Magazine, saying that the Easter Bunny seems to recall these pre-Christian celebrations of spring, heralded by the vernal equinox and personified by the goddess Eostre. And here's a quote from the BBC, saying that an Anglo-Saxon deity named Eostre was accompanied by a rabbit because she represented the rejuvenation and fertility of springtime. The problem, neither of these claims hold up to scrutiny. The real history of the Easter Bunny is far more modern than these articles suggest. The earliest known reference to anything resembling an Easter bunny comes from a 1682 treatise by a German physician named Georg Frank von Frankenau. He mentions an Easter egg hunting tradition involving a hare in 3 historical regions of the Holy Roman Empire, in what's now Western Germany and Eastern France, Westphalia, Alsace, and the Palatinate. He writes they called these eggs hare's eggs from the story told by children and the simple-minded that a hare, the Easter hare, laid the eggs to hatch hidden in the garden's grass, bushes, etc. That's it. That's the earliest mention of an Easter bunny. Well, technically an Easter hare, because if we're being scientifically precise here, because of course we must on this channel, hares and rabbits are not the same animal, though they are both part of the order Logomorpha, though Easter logomorph just doesn't have the same ring to it. Now, Easter egg traditions are older. Eggs seem to have been linked to Easter sometime in the medieval period. Christian sources such as the Council of Trullo in 692 CE stipulated that Christians were supposed to abstain from eating animal products, including eggs, during Lent. And eggs were a common food that people ate to break their fast after Lent. But the Easter bunny seems to be a later invention. Frankenau is our historical ground zero. He is the earliest concrete evidence of a local folk tradition involving an Easter hare among these Protestant German-speaking populations in 1682, and it was people from these very same regions who carried the tradition across the Atlantic, where the Easter hare moved from a local German folk custom to becoming internationally famous. In the early 1700s, German-speaking Anabaptists from places like the Palatinate and Alsace emigrated to Pennsylvania, becoming the community known as the Pennsylvania Dutch, from Deutsch, meaning German. This includes both the Amish and the Mennonites, and they brought with them a bunch of folk customs, including the Easter hare. Our earliest evidence for this are paintings by the Pennsylvania Dutch folk artist Johann Conrad Gilbert. Gilbert moved from Germany to Pennsylvania in 1757, and he made this drawing sometime after that. An Easter hare carrying a basket or bag filled with painted eggs. And it was here among the Pennsylvania Dutch that the Easter hare officially became the Easter bunny. See, just like how the English language distinguishes between hares and rabbits, the German language has 2 different words, and Hase means hare. And in the original tradition described by Frankenau, he explicitly refers to an Easter hare, Osterhase. But among the Pennsylvania Dutch, Hase was commonly translated as rabbit rather than hare, mostly because hares were rare in Pennsylvania while rabbits were very, very common. So English-speaking descendants of the Pennsylvania Dutch began referring to the tradition as involving the Easter rabbit or Easter bunny rather than the Easter hare. And contemporary observers in the late 1800s explicitly linked the growing popularity of the Easter hare in America to recent German immigration. For example, an 1890 article in The Atlantic refers to the Easter hare as a quirky novelty that had only recently become familiar to American culture. For more seasons than one cares to count, the Easter egg has been the familiar symbol of the Great Spring Festival. But of late years, owing probably to the immense increase of our foreign population, another emblem has begun to dispute its supremacy in the confectioner's shop. And for some time, hares at Easter have become almost as numerous as the eggs. The author clearly links the rising popularity of Easter hares to the influx of immigrant populations, and she probably had German immigrants in mind, implying that prior to this wave of immigration, the tradition was not widely practiced among other groups. This strongly suggests that the Easter hare was distinctly German in origin, and not part of a broader European tradition. Okay, that's the recent history. That's how we get from Frankenau in 1682 to today. But what about before Frankenau? Frankenau's passing reference to the Easter hare among German-speaking Protestants in Western southwestern Germany and eastern France is our firmest historical ground. But before that, the trail goes cold. We simply don't know when this tradition began. It's entirely plausible, and I would even say probable, that the Easter hare tradition predates Frankenau's lifetime, existing unnoticed or unrecorded. But for how long? As someone who studies the ancient Roman Empire, 1682 is already quite late historically speaking. Even if we push the origins of the Easter hare in Germany back 2, 3, 4 generations, over 100 years before to the lifetime of Martin Luther, or all the way back to the 1400s to Gutenberg and his printing press, we're still dealing with a thoroughly Christian cultural context. We would need to push it back over 1,000 years before we reach Germanic paganism. I would not be surprised if it was invented by German-speaking Protestants in this region, maybe predating Frankenau by a few generations, but I'm completely speculating when I say that. And the further back you try to push the origins before 1682, the more speculative the theory becomes without evidence for direct cultural transmission and historical continuity. For example, let's consider the popular theory that we've already seen, that the Easter Bunny was somehow linked to a springtime goddess named Eostre. That BBC reporter literally says she had a rabbit sidekick. But this is a complete fabrication. Now, I go over this more in detail in my video on Eostre, but briefly, our only direct reference to a goddess named Eostre comes from the Venerable Bede, an English monk writing in 725 CE. Bede mentions a month on the Old English calendar corresponding to the month of April, called Eostermonnoth, which he says was named after a goddess called Eostre, in whose honor feasts were celebrated in that month. Beyond this single passage, there are no other ancient sources, no surviving myths, no inscriptions, no archaeological evidence for her worship. Now, linguistic studies have suggested that the name Eostre may derive from a word meaning east or from the east, which could imply a connection to the dawn or spring equinox. Some scholars have attempted to link her to a wider Indo-European dawn goddess tradition, comparing her name to the names of dawn goddesses like Eos in Greek, Aurora in Latin, and Ushas in Sanskrit. But this remains heavily debated, and other scholars doubt the connection because her name doesn't match the Old English word for the dawn. Other scholars think from the east might just refer to a regional identity. For example, the scholar Philip Shaw thinks she was a highly localized goddess, possibly tied to Kent, a county in southeastern England. But all this to say, her connection to the modern Christian holiday is linguistic rather than religious. She gave her name to the month in which Easter most often fell, and it stuck among English-speaking Christians. And I want to emphasize that. English-speaking Christians. Most non-English-speaking Christians use variations of the word Pascha to refer to the holiday, a Greek word for the Jewish holiday Passover. So where did the bunny sidekick idea come from? For that, we need to meet this guy, Jacob Grimm. Grimm was a German linguist and folklorist most famous for co-editing Grimm's fairy tales with his brother Wilhelm. In his book German Mythology, published in 1835, Grimm theorized that Eostre had a German counterpart, a goddess named Ostara, basing this on an etymological argument that the old High German word for Easter, Osteron, seems to be linked to the name Eostre. But no direct evidence exists for Ostara. Grimm's argument was entirely linguistic, working backward from a German word for Easter rather than from any surviving primary sources. A few decades later, in 1874, the German scholar Adolf Holtzmann made our first known connection between Ostara and the Easter hare. Writing, "The Easter hare is inexplicable to me, but probably the hare was the sacred animal of Ostara, just as there is a hare on the statue of Obnoba." Now, Obnoba was a Celtic hunting goddess, linked with the Roman goddess Diana, known as Artemis to the Greeks. Here, Holtzmann is referencing this statue of Obnoba that was discovered in southwestern Germany, which depicts her beside a hunting dog holding a hare. Alright, so let's pause for a moment and reflect on how we got here. We started with Bede's passing reference to the name of a month in the 700s, which may or may not indicate the worship of a goddess named Eostre sometime in late antique England. Then, over 1,000 years later, Jacob Grimm makes a linguistic conjecture, Ostara, based on the unsupported assumption that if the English had a goddess named Eostre, the Germanic peoples must have had their own version. And then Holtzmann, struggling to explain the already popular tradition of the Easter hare, which he outright admits is inexplicable to him, proposes a speculative connection, linking the Easter hare to a completely unrelated Celtic goddess who appears in a single depiction as a huntress with a dog holding a hare. Nothing about this suggests the hare was a sacred animal, just that it was, well, hunted. So if you're claiming that the Easter Bunny traces back to an ancient springtime goddess, you're not relying on actual historical evidence. You're echoing the creative speculations of 19th century German folklorists. There is no ancient myth of a goddess with a sacred hare. no evidence linking rabbits to a pre-Christian spring festival, and no continuity between Eostray, assuming she even existed, and the Easter Bunny. What we have instead is a trail of assumptions, from Grimm's linguistic guesswork to Holtzmann's attempt to explain an already existing folk tradition that dates back to at least 1682. And from Holtzmann, the Ostara-Easter hare connection was picked up and shared again and again without support. In an 1883 book called Remains of Germanic Paganism and Christianity, the German writer K.A. Oberle elaborated that the Easter hare must have originally been a bird which the goddess transformed into a hare, and thus somehow retained its egg-laying abilities. This story was then amplified in 1896 by Popular Science of all places. The association of the hare with eggs is curious, and the explanation is found in the belief that originally the hare seems to have been a bird, which the ancient Teutonic goddess Ostara turned into a quadruped. In later decades, the story got more and more fanciful. The Minnesota-based newspaper The War and Chief published an article in 1911, claiming that the Easter Bunny was originally a bird that drew the chariot of the goddess of spring. Every year, however, at the coming of spring, the hare remembers, and in commemoration of its original bird nature, lays eggs as an offering to spring and youth it symbolizes. And at this point, we are deep into the realm of speculative imagination. Where did the idea of a chariot come from, or that the eggs were an offering to the goddess? Completely made up. That's not to say that rabbits and hares haven't been notable religious or mythological symbols in cultures all over the world for thousands of years, even within Christianity. To its credit, that's basically what this BBC article does. It's a rundown of a bunch of different bunny-themed religious traditions. In Buddhism, for example, there's a tale in which the Buddha in a past life lived as a selfless hare, who offered his own body as food to a starving traveler. The traveler ended up being the god Shakra in disguise, and instead of letting the hare perish, Shakra honors his sacrifice by drawing his image on the moon. Mythology from the Mexica people in Mesoamerica included the 400 rabbits, a group of divine rabbits linked with intoxication and drunken revelry. And rabbits were indeed a symbol of fertility for cultures all over the world. The ancient Romans, for example, were very well aware that they are prolific breeders, with some species capable of producing multiple litters per year. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder mentions them devastating the ecosystem of the Balearic Islands off the coast of Spain, and their reproductive speed led to the belief that rabbits and hares were capable of parthenogenesis, or virgin birth, which is mentioned by the medieval friar Vincent de Beauvais in his encyclopedia Speculum Maius. This obviously links the rabbit or hare to the Virgin Mary, as seen in some European paintings. The key question, though, is whether any particular rabbit tradition from any particular culture can be proven to have directly inspired the Easter hare tradition mentioned by Frankenau in 1682. Even artistic depictions of the Virgin Mary alongside rabbits, or medieval beliefs about rabbit reproductive biology, don't automatically serve as evidence for the origins of a children's egg hunting tradition among German-speaking Protestants nearly 4 centuries later. Rabbits and hares are native to most parts of the world, meaning that nearly every human culture has had the opportunity to create some form of rabbit-related mythology or symbolism. Now, we can reasonably speculate, as many have, that rabbits or hares became linked to a springtime festival because they're particularly active in the spring. The European brown hare in particular is very energetic during the spring and can be seen boxing with other hares. But this doesn't mean they were ever part of a religious tradition. Rather, their association with Easter is more likely a product of common observation. In his study on the Easter Bunny, the folklorist Stephen Winnick explains this by making a distinction between symbolic and indexical connections. A symbolic connection is arbitrary and relies on cultural convention, like how a red octagon means stop just because we all agree on that. But indexical connections are based on real-world relationships, like how dark clouds indicate rain because they naturally occur together. He argues that rabbits and hares are indexically linked to spring in the European context because they actually appear and behave in ways signaling the season. This means that different cultures could independently link rabbits with springtime or fertility without any direct borrowing from one another. Different groups observed the same natural patterns and responded the same. Though the scholar Peter Gainsford argues that searching for the Easter Bunny's origins as a specifically rabbit-related tradition is probably the wrong approach. See, in different parts of Germany, the role of Easter egg deliverer has been assigned to various animals. Depending on the region, northern Germany had an Easter fox, the region of Franconia still has an Easter stork, so Dr. Gainsford argues that the choice of animal was flexible and not inherently tied to rabbits at all. So rather than searching for some ancient bunny-themed mythology or fertility goddess, it makes more sense to see this as a general folk tradition where any small familiar animal could take on the same role. Instead of talking about an Easter bunny, he says we should really be talking about a German Easter critter of indeterminate species, which I personally think we should bring back. Give some other animals the honor to deliver Easter eggs. So while it's tempting to view the Easter Bunny as a relic of the deep past, in all likelihood it's quite modern. Religious traditions are not static artifacts of the past. They shift and change, sometimes shifting dramatically even within a generation or two.
So this is my honest opinion. How do we get from the German, from the Dutch, and from the bunny and the rabbit making eggs, right? Usually I know rabbit or mammal. I know chicken makes eggs, but not rabbit. The mammals, right? They're like dogs. They make little puppies, right? So that's just, how do we all that get to the church? So there is an experiment. This is what I think. There is an experiment that people were talking, right? For example, there's 10 people, and I say something to the first person, and you want the last person, which is the 10th person, to say back the same thing I told the same person, if the first person. And there was a miscommunication. So whatever I said, the 10th person was totally different. So I think this is what's going on. People just made it up. Basically, I don't see anything in the Bible that say that Easter was in the Bible and it's related to Jesus' resurrection. I don't see that. Or the Passover, whatever it is, right? There is nothing in the Bible about the Easter bunny. I think just people made it up just for the Easter. It's just pagan. For me, basically, point blank, Easter is pagan, right? Like, subscribe, leave your thought down in the comment section, and I will see you in the next video.